Elizabeth says, I was just getting ready to ask, what is the process? Okay, so this is where it becomes so paradoxical, because seen in retrospect, most people who've had a deep shift or self drops away will point back and go, look at all this that happened. But they'll also point back and go, none of that did anything. That was not causative. And my deep intuition, and take this for what it's worth, because who fucking knows? Do you think I know anything? This is an unknowing process. It's where any knowledge that you have is useless, because it comes from the mind as the dream, as the illusion, as the separate self. You can still have thoughts. The thoughts still show up, but they're not knowledge. There is no knowledge. There's just this radiance happening now. That doesn't mean that you become an imbecile and you can't like park your car or remember where your house is, because that all arises. That appearance arises. House is here. Conditioning takes me here, apparently. But really what's happening is nothing. It's just emptiness vibrating with appearance. And when that's seen, you go back and go, there was no process. However, almost inevitably, the people who talk about this have had this process from the standpoint of the mind. They went on they meditated, they read books, they had a trauma, they did a ayahuasca, whatever the hell. Something apparently happened. And my intuition is that there's an energetic unfolding that just is happening only now from nothing, from the infinite nowness that we are. And people, apparent body minds that wake up have a pattern of appearance that shows up as, oh, it turns out they meditated a bunch of hours, or they went to India, or they found a guru, or they read a book, or they did ayahuasca, or they watched a bunch of YouTube videos on non-duality, or they watched this bald fucking ex-Stanford doc, intellectually masturbating about this shit, which can't be spoken about like he knows shit. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything. And neither do you. Neither does any human. So it shows up as a process. So I could tell you, well, my process was, you want me to tell you my apparent process? It was this. 2012, I have this big shift moving to Las Vegas. My whole world was upturned. My ego was directly attacked with a lot of weed involved by a person who may or may not have known what they were doing. And that led to a relaxation and a realization that was beyond the mind, that everything is perfect as it is, and that the self I thought I was is not me. And there's no other way to say it. That was the shift, the realization I had in 2012. I didn't know what it was. All I knew is instantly my life was totally different. Suddenly, everything I thought was important, like the acquisition of success, all this other stuff, was seen clearly to just be a story. Now, that honeymoon period around that realization lasted maybe a few weeks, but it never left. The knowing of it never left. And what it did was it then seemingly led me to start listening to audiobooks like The Power of Now, which I was like, wait, what is this present moment? Oh my God, of course it's all there is. Wait, what? This is so intuitively makes sense, but intellectually makes no sense. So this starts happening, and then suddenly people show up that I'm recognizing are actually somehow pointing, teaching me in a way, but I don't ask for it, and it's uncaused. And then, I build this clinic and I do all this other stuff, and I'm surrounded by people that think a little bit differently, and there's this sense of seeking connection and meaning and wondering why I would do that. And then continuing to read, listening to Sam Harris, Waking Up, listening to his podcast, trusting Sam because he was a skeptic and a rationalist and is. And so my mind was a little disarmed, going, well, if Sam Harris can talk about waking up and realizing the no self, center everywhere nature of consciousness, well, maybe there's something there. And then diving down the scientific rabbit hole, because this body mind is conditioned to love the fucking science. I love it. The scientific method, right? By the way, spiritual gangster. I'm just going to say, so love this thing so much. Thank you so much, Aaliyah. Find out, watch Donald Hoffman's TED Talk on the nature of perception and the fact that everything is a graphical user interface, species-specific graphical user interface, or GUI, through which we see reality. And what is reality? Well, it's not material stuff. In his estimation, it's all awakeness. It's all consciousness. Well, okay, that drove me down the rabbit hole. I interview Don. He becomes a friend. I realize, oh, there's something intuitively right here, but it still feels incomplete. And it is, because now you're making consciousness a thing, and there's still a you. So at this point, I go into full seeking mode. I start to meditate. I read The Mind Illuminated by Culadasa, aka Yeats, a very scientific, rationalist, sort of Theravada Buddhist approach to Vipassana meditation, insight meditation. And I spend an hour a day meditating with the timer. And I find that I'm getting more and more volatile, and I'm getting more and more reactive. And I'm like, I thought meditation was supposed to fucking make me better. And only in retrospect was it realized that by dropping the defenses and the repression, by jumping into thought all the time, by dropping that emotion, repressed material is going to emerge, and it's going to show up in this very volatile way if you're not knowing what's happening. And instead of allowing it, I tended to resist it. So that was part of the journey. Then I discover, Angelo DeLullo, Dr. DeLullo, Simply Always Awake on YouTube. And he's pointing directly at no self, directly at reality, and has ways to actually experience the I am sense, unbound consciousness, he calls it, pointing to it, the space between thoughts. Before a thought arises, what are you? Stay in that silence. Then a thought arises. Notice that's a thought. Could be an image, could be a concept, could be a piece of language. Those are the tricky ones, because you start believing that thought and it leads to another thought and another thought. And next thing you know, you're lost in the thought train. So notice it by practice, come back. What's here between thoughts? When's the next thought coming? Get really interested in thought, recognizing thought for thought. What's in between? Just stay there. So Angelo, then a retreat with Angelo, my first meditation retreat with our supporter group, about 30 people in Monterey. And I have this massive heart-opening experience where I'm feeling all the suffering of humanity, and it feels like my chest explodes and energy comes straight out of it. That's another experience. Mystical experience, Kundalini energy. Who cares? It's fucking who cares? It's the dream character having another dream experience. Wonderful. But at the time, it felt like everything. It felt like awakening. This must be what it is. Okay. Well, it did change. Something changed. Something shifted energetically, because I found myself crying for no reason at the drop of a hat and feeling emotions that I didn't know I was capable even of feeling, and feeling connected to people in a way that I'd never felt. And it was just felt like pure love. Well, retreat number one. Then back into the mix of, oh God, back into work, and then fucking COVID and vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and bullshit and more bullshit and mind stuff and story and illusion, and great. But this illusion has apparent consequences because people live and die. There are no people. There is no life and death. However, because we're in the dream, you live it seriously. And there's still a self living it. So I get sucked into that fucking vortex, which was great because it actually brought people into this sphere that were also seeking, that were also trying to find truth. And they couldn't find it on the left and they couldn't find it on the right. So they find it in this vague sense of what is even truth. There's a little truth everywhere. And is anything quite true? There's an intuition that the core of all this is an empty potentiality that can be anything. And so then retreat number 2 at Angelo's house, just a small one. And at that point, I experienced completely unbound consciousness where I am just that consciousness. And that was just from inquiry during the meditation. Who am I? What am I? My question was, what am I? And then look right in your experience. It's not an intellectual question. What am I right now when I don't believe a thought? What am I when I when I let all thought go, all belief go, all history and past go, what am I? I'm that. That's what it feels like. Consciousness, awareness, unbound, feels expansive, infinite. Feels like this is occurring in that field of spacious awareness. And that was beautiful. Walking through the Denver airport going, there's nothing happening here that isn't inside of what I am. That's how it felt. And that kind of relaxing back into the daily grind. And again, being now unable to not feel other people's emotions and unable to not feel anger when it arises, very hard to repress, and feeling very unstable and destabilized and dark nighty, where it's like, oh God, now I'm less happy, more volatile, feel more constricted, more upset, because any sense of constriction feels intolerable. And then you're comparing it to this experience of expansiveness, of unbound awareness. And the truth is, that's still an experience. That's still objectifying this thing as, oh, I am consciousness now. There's still an I. There's still a sense of self there. It's just the self is much more expanded. This is just my experience. My experience. So that was that. Then another retreat in November of 2022 in North Carolina with Angelo, 100 people or something. And there I really deeply knew emptiness prior to consciousness. It's unspeakable. You can't talk about it. It's as if all of this is a foam vibrating ecstatically out of absolutely nothing, but it's not separate from the nothing. It is the nothing, the no thing. That's what I mean by nothing, not what the mind says. And that became so apparent, but still there's a sense of a center, apparently, intermittently, strongly. Then I meet, Angela points me to Suzanne Chang, Suzanne Non-Duality on YouTube, and she comes and visits. And my wife, who's never been on a spiritual path, has this massive awakening, which is detailed elsewhere in my videos recently. And I'm there, and I have an experience of the self. And again, what is this? How am I even talking about this as an experience? It's not. None of this. This is pointless to even talk about. But it was apparent that there was nobody home here. And I say was apparent because that sense of constriction or contraction does appear again. But it can't be believed for very long. It shows up as an appearance, this sense of separation. And it became so clear, oh, this is the center of this whole thing, is that there's no center. There's only just this. There was never a me. There was never a Zubin to be ashamed of anything, to feel unworthy, to any of that. Those feelings can arise, and that's fine. Even the sense of contraction can arise, and that's fine. And everything that this conditioned body-mind does is exactly as it's going to be. That's all fine. And you can actually, that can be seen. And again, this sounds dumb because there's nobody seeing it. It just is. It just is, and it's allowed. There's not the retreat into the apparent mind. I don't know how else to talk. It's impossible to talk about. You can see I'm like struggling. It's almost pointless. But for those people who are with me here, you will experience all the pain, all the hurt, all the story as just that. And it will be uncomfortable from the standpoint of the mind, beyond uncomfortable, like dying again and again and again, every single day, this energetic sense that something is letting go, something is falling away, something is releasing, because it's all energetic. It's all a kind of energy pattern that makes us believe and constrict around our hurt to protect it, our emotions to repress them, our trauma to get away from them. And that always creates an energetic sense of an owner of that. So when those experiences when that energy is allowed to express, the owner of those experiences, another energy pattern, can relax, can disappear, can be seen that it was never there. Nothing was ever there. It's always this immediate, ephemeral impermanence of absolutely nothing showing up as absolutely everything perfectly. And if you think that's nihilism, you haven't experienced, and again, you can't experience it. You haven't gone beyond, mind hasn't relaxed and non-conceptual knowing of this appeared. Apparently, although it's happening now, it's all there is. There's nowhere to go. There's no beings to awaken. There never were. But a fat lot of good that does you. If you're so mired in identification, mind identification, and suffering that you don't even know it's possible that there's another knowing that's not knowing. That's why we talk about it. That's why there's a process that at the end, there's no end. You can look back, there's no back, you see, and go, oh, there was no process. It's a paradox, pure and simple.